Willow Creek Springs presents Healthy Living with your host, Joe Grumbine.
Well, hello and welcome back to the Healthy Living Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Grumbine, and today I'm kind of tickled. I have a returning guest, and I love it when this happens. This is David Amerland, and if you remember, he came on, I don't know, I guess it was back in April or May, and we were talking about his new book, Built to Last. David and I share a lot in common, and he's a accomplished author. He's published several books. He's got an amazing health-based platform, and I've been able to experience a little bit of that, and I plan to go deeper into it. But most importantly, we share a lot of common experiences and ideas about the road to wellness. David, welcome back. I'm so glad to have you back here on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. And Joe, I'm actually thrilled to be back talking to you. Last time, as you said, the synergy was great. I left the conversation feeling buzzed. I'm really excited to see what we're going to cover today.
Yeah, and the last time we talked, I was deeply battling a big tumor sticking out of my neck, and today we're in a much better place than that. And I've traveled this crazy roller coaster of Western medicine and holistic approach and spiritual practices and energy work and all of these things that you're so familiar with. And I know you're actually talking to us from the beautiful country of Greece, and I'm kind of curious to see what is Greece like this time of year.
It's actually pretty hot. It was 36 degrees centigrade today.
All right.
I don't know.
Well, there's no big fires burning or anything right now, though, right?
No, at the moment, no. I mean, there was a bit of a
Good.
scare like a couple of months back in July.
Right, I remember.
Yeah, but that sort of has blown over now. So
Well,
we're just enjoying
good. We've
the
been
weather.
relatively quiet out here in California too. We, as always, there's wildfires burning every day, but not like some of the big ones we've had. There's still some activity. Well, and speaking of wildfire, we deal with health, right? The idea
Yes.
of our body and mind and spirit's potential. Is that kind of how you see health? I mean, to me, I see the target as what are you capable of, right? That's your goal is, maybe we could try to be the best we can. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. And I'm very glad you sort of bring things together like body, mind, spirit. Frequently, we tend to focus on the body because it's a part of us that we actually see.
Right.
And when we work on that, we see some changes and we think, well, that's all there is. But essentially, it's a much bigger picture. And what we know from neuroscientific studies where the body and the brain have actually been looked at in tandem, whatever the brain images, the body can actually become.
So true.
And there's in traditional literature, especially in martial arts, there's a whole body of work where you have advanced practitioners sitting and sort of contemplating, and in their mind, they're going through very specific techniques and they're working through and focusing on them. And within the literature, it said that, advanced practitioners, they need to train as much in the dojo because they could actually do it that way. And it sounds like a little bit airy-fairy. It's sort of, you think this is not going to happen.
Right.
But we have actually done fMRI studies on this now. We know that if you imagine your body moving in a particular way, or if you imagine your body responding in a particular way, the neurochemistry of your blood cells changes in response to that. Blood temperature goes up. Cellular activity begins to increase. The metabolic rate of the resting body actually shows an increase. Now, that increase is not of the same order of magnitude if you actually engage in that physical activity. But nevertheless, everything is activated in the same way, but to a much smaller degree. And this is a connection of body and brain, the imaging part of us, where we actually visualize what we want to become, and we help our body to actually reach that.
Oh, it's absolutely true. In fact, in my studies, just in my health studies, there's been actual case studies done where they've taken athletes and they've had one athlete, these are pro level athletes that are, the highest trained bodies in the world. And one of them, they were all injured and they were in recovery. And one of them physically was going through the efforts to rehabilitate and going through the physical activities, but not doing any mental work on it. And one of them was laying in a hospital bed and visualizing going through those very same activities. And the third one did nothing. And so this was, I think they were doing brain scan studies as well, but this was just watching the physical progress of it. And they said that the athlete that laid in his hospital bed, but visualized the same efforts and exercises and therapeutic techniques as the athlete that actually was doing them, had a very similar rate of recovery. And the one that laid in his bed and did nothing had a dramatically reduced recovery. And it was really astounding to see that in action. And I come from a number of spiritual traditions where visualization is part of a prayer. And I've witnessed myself, the clearer you can imagine a thing, the quicker it happens. And it happens more or less just like you imagine it. It's really incredible. And a final point before we jump further is something that I've always brought to people's mind is that everything you see that was ever made by man, or frankly in nature, I believe, all started out as a thought. Like there isn't a piece of furniture, a house, a car, a piece of clothing, anything that somebody didn't see first in their mind before they created it. And I think
Absolutely.
to understand that is like, oh, well, why am I not spending? And then you think about what am I doing in my mind, scrolling through social media, arguing about stupid things. And you're like, what am I creating here all day long, right?
Yes. It's funny you should say that. We tend to think that we think with our brain because we are the direct observers of our thoughts as they take place
Right.
on a self-awareness level. But there is the external mind theory, which says that essentially the brain thinks with the world. It needs the external input in order to process the signals, which will give rise to emotions, which will create thoughts, which will lead to actions.
Right.
And if you're separated from the world, well, sure, you can have some kind of thinking for a while, but we know from people who have been put in incarceration and they have had to be put in an isolation cell.
Right.
That within 24 to 48 hours, they begin to hallucinate.
Mm-hmm.
And within 72 hours, they lose touch of reality and sometimes they lose touch of who they are themselves.
Yeah.
And when I was writing Built to Last, one of the things which I looked at is the quietest room in the world, which is created by Microsoft. Now, Microsoft has created an incredible room, and I can't remember the cost of it now, but it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Essentially, it rests on particular sensors, and it's sort of surrounded by different levels of insulation. And when you're in that room, nothing from the external world comes in. No sound, no vibration, no airflow, nothing. And people who enter that room experience vertigo. They feel that suddenly something changed.
Mm-hmm.
And the transition is that even though you're in a building that's relatively quiet, because nobody's shouting, that building is subject to vibrations. It's subject to a whole lot of sensations which come from the external world. We don't consciously understand that we're processing those vibrations, but they still make us feel connected to that world. They make us feel part of something, even though we're not consciously aware of it. And the moment you enter that, I think it's called Room 52, which is not very imaginative. You enter that place and there's no vibrations, nothing coming from that external world. There's nothing coming from the earth, nothing coming from traffic, nothing coming from airflow. There are no variations in temperature. And suddenly you realize how much work your senses are doing all the time, connecting you to things around you, which make you feel part of something bigger. And the moment you're in that room, I mean, people feel nauseous. They feel like they're going to throw up. Some people can't actually stand up straight because there's no feedback from the planet. You know, normally if we stand up and try to balance, there's we're not aware of it. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yes. So it's fascinating, but that comes back to what you were saying, that, you know, the brain itself is getting a lot of stuff from around us, nature, things we see, things which we think, we imagine. And a lot of the things and thoughts which we create are the result of input signals we've processed from somewhere.
Absolutely.
And that's constantly goes on.
That's one of the problems that they need to solve with deep space travel, you know, even if they can figure out how to put a human into, you know, some kind of suspended animation and keep them there for a while. What do you do with the brain? You know, and if you put a body to sleep, what is the brain that's sleeping, or is it still trying to process things, and what's going to do without that feedback? There's a lot going on, and I think some of it, you know, I wasn't aware of this room you're talking about. I could imagine the complete deprivation would have such a negative effect. Like you I think about isolation as going to nature where you're not bombarded with all the signals, you know, the 5G and you know, the radiation and the sound waves and all of the things, even just the words and the noise and you know, the waves that everybody's putting out just from their own aura fields. You go up into the high Sierras or some remote place for, you know, you go hike for an hour and sit up on a rock, and all of a sudden, you know, you feel this connection just to the earth. And it's a different feedback. And generally, for me anyways, it's very positive. You know, you feel the earth under your feet, you feel probably the magnetic field, you feel whatever energy the rocks and the trees and the animals around you are putting out, but it's a different type of energy than, you know, a bunch of angry humans are putting out. And I think that there's definitely a healing that comes from a type of isolation for a period of time, but not a complete isolation. Like you talk about in a prison environment where you go into a solitary confinement that is designed to isolate a person's spirit and humanity and break them down the way it does. I mean, it's made for that and it works so well. Whereas you can spend time in nature, I think, for a while before it gets to you. It'll probably get to you eventually. But and I don't believe we're designed to be by ourselves for longer than some, you know, brief period of time, days or weeks, whatever that is. But yeah, I think that there's definitely this like line, just like everything, you know, we come to understand the layers. And, you know, frankly, when I say we understand, I speak from an animal point of view, really. Like, you know, we don't understand shit. You know, we talk about God, and I'm like, how do you even think to mention a word like that when we don't even understand a fourth dimension when out of who knows how many, right? So these little tidbits that we are able to understand, I think, is important to have discussions about because it opens up the notion that everything's so much bigger than, you know, our perception of it is. And when you're talking about body, mind, and spirit, I think more often than not, the body, which we glorify so much and we give so much attention to, is often just a barometer of what's really going on. You know, when you find, you know, you work with clients all the time, and I'll bet more often than not, you find there's an emotional or spiritual or mental core to a problem that's being shown with physical symptoms. What's your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Every time. Always. There's in the canon of Eastern philosophy, there's a line that says, what is within will be manifested without. And that's exactly what we're seeing every single time. Athletes who are blocked, the elite performers who are blocked in their performance, they have an emotional knot to work their way through.
Absolutely.
We see top level, top flight CEOs in companies who can't actually physically do their job properly because emotionally they're blocked somewhere.
Right.
So every time we experience any kind of dysfunction at a physical level, whether that is attentional, stress related, physical performance related, anything which tends to stymie us and hold us back, it has a root cause in the emotional aspect of ourselves. And unless we can work through that, through a clearer understanding of our identity, our goals, our purpose, we most times fail to get past it, and we reach a ceiling until the next level.
Absolutely. You look at a professional athlete that's, world-class athlete, right? A pitcher, a batter, a quarterback, whatever, a basketball player, a soccer player, it doesn't matter. Everybody sometimes finds themselves in a slump where they go from performing consistently in all manners of challenge and obstacles and different, a boxer, whatever, left-handed, right-handed, high altitude, low altitude, these guys just perform. And then all of a sudden one day they stall out and they can't do anything right. And, they talk about the slump, they talk about all these things, but the truth is there's something blocking them. A writer, a prolific writer, all of a sudden they can't come up with 5 words to put together, an actor, a performer of any kind. So you deal with people on a regular basis. People come to you, looking to improve their performance or solve a problem. And how do you address that? I think that this is an important little piece of the puzzle here.
It is, and we always go through a very simple process where we try to understand what's really important to that individual. And most of the times, people conceptualize. They use cognitive processes to sort of think of what they want to do because they have this perception of how they should be seen, how they should be performing. But none of those things are true to who they are. And the moment we start peeling back the layers of what does that person want to do, and then why do they want to do it, then it becomes a lot clearer, because then the true values come to the surface, the true purpose comes to the surface, the true focus of what they should be doing, and then it becomes very evident why they can't perform the way they can. And sometimes, due to circumstances, they reach a natural ceiling. They can't get past what they have because the circumstances now holding them back, and they need to change them, usually by changing jobs or changing careers,
Right.
or changing approaches. But that process, that very simple process, is pretty brutal. You have to face yourself. You have to be
Right.
truthful.
That's
And we lie to ourselves all the time.
Oh, constantly. Constantly. I think that's huge. We talked in our very first conversation about accountability, and that's really, I think, what's underneath all of this. I was telling you, I work with a lot of healers from around the world, and I know it's kind of a fashionable thing, but I've been doing this for my whole life. And lately, been spending some time with some plant medicines that have really held me accountable. So when you spend all night long, in a fire and working with these medicines and singing and praying and just really putting your attention to this one thing, um, you get shown a truth. And
Yes.
most of these times, it's not something you necessarily want to see, or it's something that you already know, but you've been sort of pushing aside, or maybe it's something you didn't even realize, and all of a sudden it comes gushing out of you. And you're like, whoa, I didn't even get that. But it's that truth, that accountability that I think is instrumental to our healing, regardless of what the problem is. And so when you deal with somebody, you're looking at basically going back to basics and saying, okay, well, what brought you here, right? What's your goal? What are you doing, right? What's your point here? What are you doing, right? And that's usually pretty easy to come upon. Oh, I'm trying to do this. So my goal, you beat the goal into your head for so long. But then when you come to, okay, well, how did you get here? What have you done? And, why are you here? What's in your way? You start looking at these truths. And we spend so much time making excuses for things or convincing ourselves that it's okay, to put up with this or to allow ourselves that, even though we said we weren't gonna. We come up with reasons, excuses for just about anything and everything. I know I have the ability to do that. And when I hold myself to the fire and say, no, you said you're going to do this, all of a sudden it's like, okay, whew, it's not easy. But all of a sudden the road starts going, instead of going zigzagging and up and down, it gets a lot more straight and narrow. And you realize, if I just do the thing I said only, and own the consequences of what I don't, and say, oh, well, I got this, but then look, I did that. And um, it becomes a lot easier in the sense of the confusion and the how did I get here? And I don't know why, I don't know. And it becomes more just a matter of choices and accountability. What are your thoughts on that?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, most people, without exception, struggle with some kind of lack of clarity.
Mm-hmm.
And the lack of clarity comes from that initial inability to focus on the things that are truly important to us. And most of the time, we don't understand what is truly important to us. We kind of receive messages from the external world that tells us to focus on specific things, behave in a particular way, be a particular type of person. But the moment we actually focus on what is important to us, then we are better able to prioritize. If we prioritize our actions, we're actually putting a lot of energy into things which we're going to do. And that begins to reflect our values. And it's the values that actually help us understand the range of choices in front of us and which choice we should be making. So once we sort of break it down like this, it becomes very straightforward and self-evident. And obviously, it is not anything like that. It is really, really difficult. And you said earlier that how difficult it is to actually deal with that, go through, peel back the layers, ask why, and get some answers, and then keep on asking why until you get to truly basic answers. And what comes from that is that in most cases, we fail to understand our initial conditions, the trauma we have, the growth
Right,
we need to undertake. And growth is what makes us adults. We start out as children,
right,
and regardless of how well placed we are in the world, as children, we're going to receive some kind of trauma. This is inevitable.
right,
And then that childhood trauma, to some extent, will determine our initial phases as young people.
right,
But from then on, the adulting part of us, the part of us which says, you're an adult, is the
right.
part that actually takes that trauma, understands it, begins to put in place processes that help you overcome it so that your reactions, your thoughts, your thinking, your values are not rooted in the trauma that initially shaped you.
Totally
And
agree.
that includes your mental as well as your physical health. If you are, for example, and we've seen it before, people who are reactive, they're reactive because, they came from a childhood home perhaps where everybody around them reacted in
Right,
really ordinary ways. So their neurological processes, the way that they process signals from the outside world, have a lower arousal threshold, which leads to higher reactivity to external stimuli, which means that they experience a lot more stress in their life, they're more anxious, they're less able to focus their attention, they experience more chronic conditions because of stress, they make bad choices because they can't focus their attention, they tend to be overweight, they tend to be unfit, they tend to get into wrong relationships, the whole list of things. And you say, okay, how do we fix that?
right,
And the moment you realize that, hey, I don't have to be like that. I don't have to be reactive. I don't have to be anxious about everything. And of course, you obviously need to realize why you're anxious and reactive in the first instance. Then you begin to change your behavior. If you change your behavior, you change your neurochemistry and your homeostatic balance. And that has a whole lot, an entire cascade of positive health outcomes, which then lead to better choices.
Hi, this is Joe Grumbine, and I wanted to share an update. The platform that hosts this podcast has made some changes to the subscriber settings, and we have a number of subscriber-only episodes that we offer to the supporters, and for a minimum of $3 a month, we can get you signed up. And if you're already signed up and you're having some kind of trouble locating these episodes in the other platforms, I would say maybe the best answer is to unsubscribe and then resubscribe. I'm sorry for the hassle. I don't have any way to make a change, but I'm very grateful for all the support. Thank you. I've got a question. In some of the work I've been doing with some of the different people from different traditions, many times it comes to going back and visiting yourself as a child and saying, all right, well, let's go back and see if I can get in touch with who I was at that time and try to remember. You go back to memories that are implanted that you are, there's fixed. Most of your life, I don't think you remember. It's mostly a blur, but there are these certain milestones, these points where you can go, okay, I can go right back to that Christmas morning, or I can go back to that one time when that thing happened, and just literally go back and live through those eyes. And some of the work that I've been doing with some of these people, and whether it's in a sweat lodge or in a different type of a ceremony setting, involves going back to a traumatic moment and meeting that person who is you and accepting them and acknowledging that you see them. Well, it's getting emotional just even talking about it. But, we go through our life not thinking about who we were, where we came from, because you don't want to remember these things sometimes. And, for me, I had a relatively mild childhood, but you still go back and you remember as a child, well, the things that today don't seem like they were a big deal, maybe at a time they did. And, you live in a much smaller world when you're a kid, and something happens to you then, and you're like, whoa, that just rocked my world. And I didn't even remember that. And you go back and you tell that kid, you're going to be all right. And I love you. And something about you sort of connects with that and reestablishes that as a part of you. Like you are who you are because of what you've done. And have you dealt with people sort of acknowledging their younger persons? I hate to use that term inner child, because I think that's more of a concept of a way of thinking rather than the actual person who was there at the time. And, I don't know how time works. I think maybe something in the past is still happening on some weird level. But
the child is always present in us.
Right.
Always.
Right.
It's never really gone away. And you're right. A lot of the times we live in a state of denial. We think, well, I'm all grown up now. I'm all responsible now. And you think, well, where does that come from? What does it even mean? What does it mean grown up? What does it mean responsible? And once you need to peel back the layers. We use words without thinking. Those words actually have meaning. That meaning has a certain burden of behavior. And that tends to lock us into states which sometimes are not natural to us. So we end up fighting ourselves pretty much always.
Oh, pretty much always. We're always our worst enemy, I think.
Yes. I think during the pandemic is the biggest, which is, if from a certain perspective, the pandemic became a global social experiment.
Sure.
Suddenly, 2019, I had a lot of traveling to do with my consulting work, especially in terms of social media marketing and search, and dealing with executives and the C-suite execs from different global companies. And that 2019, I traveled 55,000 air miles. I was crisscrossing the globe. Yeah, it's crazy.
A lot of
And then
travel.
the pandemic, the pandemic hit, and of course all that died like that, and we're locked in. So then we ended up having Zoom calls, and it was fascinating because, you're having Zoom calls with people who are the same people. They have the certain kind of executive power, they still run certain teams, they still have a certain level of corporate authority, except now those people are working from home with their wives and kids and a dog.
Right.
And they're falling apart.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing there to show up who they are, to give them the status they have, to reinforce the identity they had of the projection that they were putting out, which was meeting the expectations of the world around them.
Right.
So then we had to say, okay, what do you want to do, really? Yeah. And, so meetings that were supposed to be about one-to-one, sometimes two-to-one. That was supposed to be about reshaping corporate strategy and reworking marketing, messaging, and all those things, and understanding the dynamics that were in effect. Ended up being kind of psychotherapy because we had to go through that first.
It always ends up that way, right?
Yeah, before they could actually then focus on work and feel comfortable working from home in that environment and still feeling that they had the authority and the power that they had when they were at work. That's crazy, but also eye-opening, right? Because it showed us how much we tie into expectations, how much we respond to expectations, how much we behave to an expectation which is then reinforced because we met it. So somebody expects you to be, let's say somebody expects you to be a sergeant major, kind of caricature we see in films. And you actually come out and you behave like that. You dress the part, you look the part, you sound the part.
Right.
This is not you, but if that's what I'm expecting from you and you give it to me, I'm going to think you are great. Yeah, I think you're great. And now what have I done? I've locked you into that.
Right.
You can't say to me, hey, David, I'm not really like that. I'm a really nice guy. I'm going to do it differently. Because I expect you to be that way. And now you're going to wreck that.
Yeah.
So this actually happened in the pandemic. The external world suddenly came to a stop. People had to really dig deep to find the resources they needed to understand who they were in order to do their basic day-to-day job from a distance. That was an eye-opener.
I couldn't agree more. What a game changer. I mean, it killed a lot of businesses. It took a lot of people from a higher point, lowered them down, whatever, from a socioeconomic point of view. And yet some people found their niche inside of this place and began to thrive and created some new opportunities and some new tools and techniques.
Exactly. It forced a lot of people to actually become real, because that is really powerful. If you are you always, well, I only have two options here. I can either accept you or reject you.
Right.
And that's on me, right? So if I reject who you are because, we don't click, well, that's it. But it's not on you because you are you. Right. But so that's a very real, very strong connection. If you're not real, but you're projecting to what I think you need to be, you're trapped into that, and I'm sort of trapping you with my expectations. And that's a very fake it's very draining. It doesn't help me because I'm not really getting the real you.
Yeah. The connection is sort of lost in a third party somewhere.
Exactly. And from your perspective, it's so tiring because, you have to be this for me. You're going to have to be something else for somebody else. You're going to have to be something else for somebody else. Then the question that's begged is, who are you really inside you?
Lose touch with who you are if you're performing all the time, I think.
Yes. And it's stressful. It actually, it's reflected in higher people who are in a kind of mode. They have higher incidences of heart disease, cardiovascular illnesses, chronic stress. They have sort of all those things which are associated with high stress levels and anxiety, because you're constantly performing, and your brain is constantly alert, sort of trying to look for clues. What do I expect you to be, so that you can give it to me?
I couldn't agree more. Well, David, I knew this was going to happen. We're going to get jumping down a rabbit hole and have a great conversation. Next thing I know, I've gone over my time, and it's all good. I was hoping it would happen this way, and it did beautifully and naturally. I think that, we really touched on some very important points. I'd like to give you an opportunity to kind of wrap it up into a thought, if you can, and,
Absolutely, yes.
and
Thank
remind
you.
us how we can get a hold of you and some of the latest work you've been doing.
Thank you for this. Okay, so here's an easy way to make life simpler. If you find ways where you're true to yourself, always, then you reduce the energetic load of your day-to-day living. And that makes life infinitely simpler because you have more margin to deal with emergencies. They're still going to happen. You're still going to meet a crisis. You're still going to have some problem to deal with. But now you have more energy to actually deal with that, as opposed to always operating to the very edge of your capability. And then anything extra happens is too much, and it can cause you to crash and burn. I still put out a lot of stuff. I put out a lot of studies these days. I tend to link to the studies and sort of, put in a couple of sentences explaining them. So you find this on my website at davidamerland.com. And you can find me on social media as well, because I put them out there as well.
Wonderful. Well, David, as always, I knew when I met you the first time, we talked before we even recorded our first episode. I go, man, this guy needs to be a regular. And I really appreciate your way of thinking. And I know you're helping a lot of people out there. And I look forward to our continued conversation.
Same here. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Beautiful. Well, thank you all to the listeners. And this has been another edition of the Healthy Living Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Grumbine, and we will see you next time. This has been another episode of the Healthy Living Podcast. We produce this show so that people can share their stories, people that have overcome obstacles, people that are undergoing obstacles. We're building a community of health-minded individuals. If you're interested in supporting the show, please leave a review on the platform you're listening to it on. If you're interested in becoming a guest, please send an email to itsjoegrumbine@gmail.com, or you can send a note into the notes section of the podcast. All right. Well, thank you for supporting this show, and we hope you've enjoyed it.